Welcome to the Joe Berry podcast series. These podcasts, presented by former winners of the Joe Berry Award and award sponsors, are designed to provide insight into the retail market during and after the COVID-19 pandemic. Our presenters today are Trading Partners Forum scholarship winners Jessica Wozniak and Jon Stokes, with guest Samantha Blake, discussing leadership under COVID and beyond. Jon won the 2017 Trading Partners Scholarship and is mergers and acquisition lead at Coca-Cola. Jessica won in 2019 and is promotions manager Coles for Arnott's. Samantha is Director of Industry Affairs for the Australian Food and Grocery Council, who sponsor the scholarship award as part of their Future Leaders program. The podcast will provide you with a preview of your 2021 award topics. Final topics will be posted on opening day, November 1st, 2020, on Facebook and the joeberryaward.com.au website. 2021 will be the 35th presentation of this unique and prestigious award, which will for the first time be promoted globally. The 8 Joe Berry Award podcasts have the objective of getting you involved and ready to register in November. The Joe Berry Award provides a unique level of exposure for you and your career aspirations. We hope you are enjoying these podcasts. Before we start our questions on leadership, Samantha, you might like to introduce the Future Leaders Forum to our listeners.
Thank you, Keith, and thank you very much for the invitation to participate in today's podcast. At the Trading Partner Forum, we're really excited to let everyone know that the Future Leaders Forum will be continuing in 2020, but as everything, it will be a virtual event this year. The Trading Partner Forum, in partnership with the Australian Food and Grocery Council, has developed what I think is a really exciting program to inspire, motivate and challenge those that attend. We have 2 fantastic keynote speakers in Holly Ransom and Chris Riddell, who'll be exploring contemporary challenges and opportunities facing the fast-moving consumer goods and supermarket retail business. To add depth, we're going to have 3 CEO panels that includes leaders from our sector. So we have Brad Banducci from Woolworths, Greg Davis from Coles, Alison Watkins from CCA, Nikki Sparshot from Unilever, Gary Mudd from Jalna, Sam Robson, One Harvest, Denise Orr from Kinrice, and Andrew Leakey from Mars. So an excellent representation of the current leadership of the sector. I think this is a great way to invest in either yourself or your teams, particularly given that over the last 9 months, we've seen a complete reduction of face-to-face activities. So this will, we hope, provide a real opportunity for you and your teams to come together to hear thought leadership, be inspired by our existing leaders, and really challenge yourself about your own leadership journey. Event pricing has been established to make it really affordable, both for individuals and companies, and you can get further information on the Trading Partner Forum on our website. So that's a bit of a snapshot, Keith, of what we'll be doing this year on the 29th of October.
Thank you, Sam. Looks like an excellent program.
Indeed.
We'll start with you, Jon. When we talk about business, employment and leadership under COVID, what currently are the main strategies that are front of mind?
Thanks, Keith. Morning, everyone. Great to be with you. Look, it's an interesting question because personally, I've observed a number of different strategies throughout the different phases of this pandemic. What was really clear to me was once it all started that, many businesses quite rightfully took a strategy of focusing on the safety imperative and the well-being of their employees. So there was an incredible mobility amongst leaders to focus on PPE, on containment, restricted work, whether that be field or stores. But interestingly, I saw that shift pretty quickly then into, business stability strategies and focus on supply continuity, etc. And I think now what's interesting is as it's become clearer that, this pandemic isn't going away anytime soon, there's been a real focus from what I've observed on businesses reshaping for the future and shifting their workforce into those emerging areas like e-commerce, at-home occasions and out of those more on-the-go occasions or impulse offers that we would have seen, so so frequently in the past. So what's been really interesting for me is seeing how the strategy of businesses has shifted throughout the different phases of this pandemic. And I'm fascinated to see what's still to come, because I'm sure that this isn't the end of it.
Jessica, are you seeing similar strategies emerging in the supplier and retail methodologies?
Yeah, so a number of the keywords that Jon just mentioned were similar things that I was thinking about when I was reflecting on suppliers and retailers. So I think supplier, from my own experience in Arnott's, the agility that we've seen in the supply chain has really picked up, particularly if I think back during the peak of the pandemic. We were facing up to 200-300% growth on some of our categories. And we really saw the supply chain pivot really quickly to prioritise key lines, change production schedules, and it was a way that we'd never worked in the past. So that agility is something that's really continued on with the business. If I think about one of the other aspects, so the e-com aspect, I think this is something interesting we've seen of late with the Coles & Co launch. So during the pandemic, there was a shift towards digital readership. I think it was for the Coles catalogue specifically, an increase in 50% of the digital catalogue. And that provided a really good opportunity to shift focus away from hard copy catalogues towards digital, that provided a more tailored shoppable experience for consumers. And that's what we've seen. So shoppers are online a lot more. So it made sense to provide a platform that catered for those needs.
What's the ramification for the people working in the business with those changes that you just outlined?
The ramifications for people working in the business?
Yeah.
Within Coles or within retailers?
Within your own business.
So we've, I think particularly from an e-com perspective, we've seen a real amplification of the staff that we have working on e-com strategies, e-com platforms. We have expectations from retailers to really put a lot more emphasis on our e-com infrastructure, our plans, our strategies, and how can we promote, how can we activate online more effectively with more impact, so we can really shine in those spaces.
Sam, are you seeing from the members of your organisation any requests from you for assistance in looking at the way changes are coming about?
Absolutely. A couple of things I'll add into this part of the conversation. Firstly, one of my reflections on the COVID period has been the amazing collaboration that we have seen between retailers and suppliers. I'm probably the dinosaur in the room here. And in my long experience in the FMCG sector, we have never seen such good collaboration between retailers and suppliers. And it really did, to the point that Jess was making around that agility, focusing on a single goal, getting product through supply chains and working collaboratively to enable that to happen. It would be fantastic if we can see some of those learnings lead through or leak through into the way we do business into the future. From an industry association point of view, we have probably been the busiest we've ever been. This has been a real time where the industry has had to come together under the banner of the AFGC to do a lot of policy and advocacy work on behalf of the fast-moving consumer goods sector to ensure that government, decision makers, policy makers understand the importance of our sector and what needs to happen to ensure that the sector continues to operate, to continue to smooth the flow of product through those supply chains, so we don't see those terrible examples that we saw way back in March of, fights in aisles over products. Australia doesn't have a food security issue, but to ensure that we maintain consumer confidence, we need to keep the supply chain flowing. So there's been an intense amount of work on behalf of the industry by the AFGC to ensure that politicians really understand the importance of the sector.
Jon, I know you've done a lot of work in your business with the development of teams and professional development for people. Given the requirements for isolation, what has the COVID pandemic done to management theory and practice when it comes to leadership and, in fact, measurability?
I think that what this has done is it's meant that conscious leadership is increasingly more important. I think it's really easy to maintain productivity and engagement of a workforce when you're all sitting side by side, sharing ideas, feeding off each other's energy, etc. But in this isolated world, I've seen that conscious leadership and really deliberate leadership routines have been implemented by the best leaders. You know, initially there was a real ramp up in high frequency communication, regular check-ins, you know, engagement sessions, trivia nights, song nights, talent nights, you know, all that sort of thing via Zoom and WebEx and whatnot. But what I've seen since then is a real nice balance where leaders have got those virtual check-ins to stay on top of well-being and productivity. But there's also a much higher level of trust, you know, amongst the workforce and between leaders and employees from what I've seen, which I think, you know, is going to be necessary going forward because let's face it, we won't be going back to face-to-face office work anytime soon.
Jessica?
Yeah, so I think the communication piece was something that I was reflecting on quite a bit. The consistency of the communication, the clarity, the cadence, and the points for contact, as Jon mentioned. I might build on the measurability piece that you mentioned in the question, Keith. That was quite an interesting part of the question because I don't think what we're measuring has changed. I think it's how we'll measure it and how we can enable employees and the workforce to be able to achieve those targets, especially when we're working in virtual teams, many of whom have flexible hours, many different ways of working. Many of my colleagues have family at home, so they'll work earlier days or later days. So it's about that conscious inclusion that Jon mentioned, and making sure that your team have the tools and resources and the support from leadership that they need to really succeed and hit those KPIs that we all set for the year for ourselves and our teams.
Sam, what do you expect will be the change or will change the most in leadership as the workplace is reinvented?
I think this is a really interesting question and one that we're still working our way through. I think there's a couple of words that both Jon and Jess have called out over the last couple of minutes that are really important to how leadership will change. Firstly, I think communication is critical. And if we put conscious and the communication together, then I think we have, you know, one of the areas that is really going to have to be a focus for executives moving forward, and probably for all of us really to be mindful of how we communicate to people in our teams, across teams, upward and downward, because people are experiencing very different COVID journeys. As Jess said, some people have got young kids at home and they're managing, you know, they're having to manage homeschooling. Some people may have less or more work. They may have partners who have less or more work. So really trying to understand what's impacting them and how as an organisation we can best care or set up the welfare around that, I think is really important. So welfare of teams, I think, is going to become much more important. So I guess that conscious communication and the welfare of teams. You know, we live in a society where we still have domestic violence, and if we're pushing people back into having to stay at home, we need to be very conscious that we might be pushing people back out of their safe zone. Work may have been their safe zone. So it's going to need a lot of careful thinking about how we manage these really complex tasks and what we need to do to ensure overall welfare of team, safety of team, but also maintaining that focus on what the objective is, the goal is for the group, for that team, for the broader organisation. So it's expanding really the leadership remit, I think, in terms of what their roles and responsibilities are moving forward.
Jon?
Yeah, I think that what Sam touched on there was around focusing on that, you know, that objective, and with that in mind, you know, like I mentioned earlier, there's now a shift to reshaping organisations for the future, and with that, I think leaders are going to have to be considering how they strike the right balance between this isolated work and this face-to-face engagement. You know, in our business, for example, we've had Team A and Team B approaches where 50% of the workforce would be in the office at any one time. What we've noticed, though, is that that's had a real impact on productivity and the collaboration, which is so important for a business like ours, to make decisions at pace and with good debate. So, we're at a phase now where we're looking at how do we get back into the office in a safe and engaging way. And so I'm not sure what that'll look like, but I imagine that we'll see a lot more purposeful interaction within the office rather than just going in the office, sitting at your desk and, bumping into folks in the corridor. I think it'll be much more deliberate. So for real collaboration sessions, high engagement meetings, I think that's where the opportunity remains to get people back face to face, because there's no doubt there is something lost in a virtual world. It's just how we strike that balance and when the appropriate time is, I suppose, are the key questions for leaders.
Can I jump in with one other comment, Keith, if I could? The other thing that I think is really interesting to watch in this space is because we have moved away from the physical environment to this virtual world, and because the pace of what we've been doing has sped up exponentially, I think there's been much more requirement for delegated authority. So giving people this is your scope of your work, and just really letting them take carriage of that is something that we've seen happening quite a lot. So where decision making may have had to go through a couple of degrees of hierarchy within an organisation, or even decision making or stage gates, we're not seeing that happen nearly as much. It's really been much more, this is your role, off you go and get it set, and we're here to support you. So I think a lot more delegated authority is also going to be the outcome of this.
Jessica, from what Jon has said and what Sam has followed up with, do you think that there's a change in what an employee looks for in leadership, given that they're in isolation? Are they looking for different approach to it, or is it the same thing just coming through a different communication?
Well, interesting question. I feel like the things that you look for in leadership, there's a foundation of traits that we've looked for over time, but I think there'll be a dialing up of the EQ and the AQ capability of leaders. So from an EQ perspective, being aware, hyper aware of your own mental well-being and of those around you, checking in with your team to see how are you feeling, how are you going, what do you need my support? And the other area is the AQ, so the adversity quotient. So how do you deal with adversity and come out stronger the other side? And I think it's developing those traits in the leader, and that's what you look for in the leader, but also having the ability to embed that in your teams to make your teams stronger and enable your teams to be able to deal with situations like those we've just encountered and come out stronger as a team as a whole on the other side.
Well, what questions will leaders be asking of new employers as they adapt the methodology of a new approach? And equally, how will they be motivating existing employees? Jon?
Look, I think we've talked for some time, certainly in the Joe Berry Awards and amongst the Trading Partner Forum Scholarship, about the importance of purpose for organisations. I think, to borrow a phrase from Jessica, that's really going to be dialed up going forward. And we saw how well the industry came together, like Sam mentioned earlier, rallying around supply and essential services to provide the food, beverages and services that the Australian population need. And that was a really exciting thing to see. It was the first time in a long time that I think, our industry has had the accolades, whereas recently, there's been a lot of focus on tech and whatnot. But with that, we found our common purpose. And I think that employees looking to join an organisation or employees who are existing within an organisation, that purpose and that emotional connection to that purpose is what's going to help people to get through hardship. Because there's no doubt that, employment stability is going to be a challenge. There's no doubt that capabilities and skill sets are going to have to change. So there's going to be a lot of hardship ahead for many of us, I'm sure. But applying that emotional connection to the business purpose and what we're here to do, ultimately to serve Australians, high quality food, beverages and services, for me is what's going to keep people motivated.
Sam, anything to add there?
Question actually for the group. Do you think, having been through this experience, having had, as I said, politicians and policymakers focus on our sector for the first time, having had the spotlight shone on the FMCG and supermarket industries, do you think this is going to drive greater I guess, expectation for people coming into the industry? And is it going to drive a greater foot traffic to people going, you know what, that looks like a really exciting industry, I want to go and be part of that? So we're at a bit of a groundswell moment where we might get some, a swathe of new talent coming through the sector because they see things like Jon just mentioned, we're a stable industry. We're not going anywhere. Manufacturing will need to continue. We'll need to keep providing food and drink and beverages and non-grocery products to consumers. So do you think that's going to be a bit of a groundswell for the spotlight being on the FMCG sector?
Look, I'll jump in there. I think absolutely. First of all, people are driven by necessity, and if there are roles available in our industry and not in others, then I think that's going to drive a lot of attraction to our businesses. But then, secondly, I reflect on a fantastic cartoon that was doing the rounds through the pandemic, where Batman, Spider-Man, and Wonder Woman were standing, hands held out, shaking the hands of retail employees, saying, "Welcome to the club." And I think it was that sort of recognition and those accolades which were shared with our fellow peers in the industry, which will get a lot of people considering it. And all of a sudden, I think once people join our industry at an entry level, and then they understand the ecosystems we operate in, that it's much more than just about working a checkout necessarily or working in store. There's opportunities with incredible innovation, data, technology, investment, CapEx. There's all sorts of wonderful opportunities to build a career in this industry. And I think once we get more people in the door, even at those entry levels, I imagine we'll see a lot of people stick around.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I think a lot of the things that I've seen in the last few months and the likes of merchandisers being included in essential services, the call from retailers for a far greater level of service coming in to help them keep the business going, albeit some of that panic related. But at the same time, it is an opportunity area. It's showing that the industry has enormous solid or a very solid background. And I agree with Jon. I think that a lot of people will find that it's actually a very rewarding career. We're looking forward to seeing where that goes. Having said that, where do you see the most changes being affected for emerging leaders who have a career path map that maybe not be achievable in what they would have seen as the predictable manner? Jessica?
Yeah, so this is quite relevant at the moment. I guess if I reflect, there's been a lot of change in our business, and career maps that were once linear are now very fluid. So if you almost think it's not a career path, it's like a fluid career map. So how do you set yourself up for success in an environment where you don't quite know what the next step might be? I think it's about developing those core leadership competencies and skills, the AQ and the EQ that I mentioned before, but also when you're developing your career, thinking more around breadth. I guess the more breadth you can add to your career, the bigger foundation, the bigger base you set yourself up with, and the more opportunities you can really have a go at. So for emerging leaders, I definitely recommend equipping themselves with breadth.
Keith, if I could just add there, I think Jessica's exactly right. First of all, just to touch on the old school linear career path. To be honest, I think that was probably lost in the 80s. I think certainly since the turn of the century, careers have needed to be much more fluid. And the breadth you talked about, I completely agree. For me personally in my career, taking one step sideways or even a step backwards and taking a pay cut into another role is what's allowed me to then take a larger step up in the future, because getting that breadth adds another string to your bow that perhaps others who are applying for roles wouldn't have. So I'd really encourage people to throw out the old career path, because I think it's a bit naive these days to expect a linear career, and look for those opportunities that are really going to complement your base, because let's face it, no two employees are the same. Everyone comes with a different combination of skill sets and experiences, and it's that breadth and that combination of skills which I think is going to make the difference going forward, particularly off the back of the learnings we've got from this pandemic and the need for agility and decision making at pace.
Samantha, do you think that the Future Leaders Forum then will be picking up on that topic and requesting of the employers that they take a much closer look at what a career path really is, or in fact that flexibility issue that has to come into play?
Look, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with Jon and Jessica on this one. I do think that's absolutely right. There's a couple of elements I'll add to it. There has to be a degree of being self-driven about your career and being flexible and agile about your career. The breadth piece I think is really important. When you get to senior executive levels, you need to have a clear understanding of what's happening in those other areas to be able to make you a well-rounded leader. So that is essential, I think. The other thing I think that I'd call out though is we need to do this in a way, and maybe COVID will be the point that does that, that means that we're getting the grounding in each one of those areas before we move. So I know a number of people get very kind of frustrated that they've only been in, they're in that role for 18 months and they want the next step. And I think we need to just start thinking about being slightly longer in some of those roles. And if you go into a new role, you might be setting your new strategy, considering what needs to happen in that area or division, whatever it might be. You need to be there to execute some of that as well. So you've got that kind of, you can see the whole journey through. So moving through positions very quickly might give you a taste, but it's not demonstrating some of the competencies that Jess was suggesting are so important in terms of being able to establish yourself as in those career roles. So self-driven, the competencies, the breadth, and a little bit of longevity in there, I think are all going to be really critical.
So for a career-minded employee and somebody looking to be noticed as a future leader, what would be the moves that you would now suggest that they should be making?
Keith, I think for me, there's a really important move that I think we should all consider within our industry. And it's highlighted by what we just talked about with our merchandisers and our store teams being superheroes through the pandemic. Ultimately, there is a shift to the digital world and to e-com. However, still something like 95% of our grocery sales go through stores. So ultimately, that is the coalface, and that's where we engage with our shoppers and our customers. So for those on the line listening along, if you find yourself in a head office role, considering your career path through head office, through commercial roles or national account roles or, supply strategy or anything like that, I'd really encourage those folks to look at those operational roles in stores. For me personally, one of the best career moves I ever made was moving out of our shiny head office in North Sydney down to Adelaide to become a territory manager looking after a team of merchandisers. That role on the front line is a pure leadership role, and I couldn't have possibly got those learnings without taking a pay cut and moving into state to take on that operational role. And that taught me so much about our business that I couldn't have possibly learned from just looking at the P&L or working on spreadsheets or PowerPoint presentations. So, I think it's really important that people consider, when they're considering building their career, they look at those operational roles as the foundation of our industry and make sure they get that experience in store, because ultimately that's where we engage with our customers, and that's what's going to make the difference in the future.
And if I could build on, oh, sorry, Keith.
No, you go.
I was going to say, if I could build on that, one of the things I would love to see happening, and it goes back to the point that we were talking about earlier in terms of that greater degree of collaboration between retailers and suppliers throughout the pandemic. I'd love to see a system where we could exchange people within retailers and suppliers to start to build the understanding across the entire supply chain about what happens in each part of the supply chain. So I guess a bit of an extension to what Jon was saying. I think it would be fantastic if somehow we could set up some type of program that saw an exchange happening, so we can take those learnings back into our own businesses at the end of the day.
Perhaps that could be your scholarship award in the future. We'll send you from Woolworths into Coca-Cola or something similar, and see what comes out.
Happily have them.
But it's an excellent idea, and I think back in certainly, and I unfortunately go back a long way, but in those days we did management cadetships, and we were sent to every single part of the business to learn every part of the business, so that as we came out into the management levels, we were very well aware of what had to happen in each of those areas. So I applaud what you're saying. Jessica, you won the Trading Partners Forum Scholarship a couple of years ago, based on your essay submitted to the Joe Berry Award. What has that meant to you, having won that award?
It's been a great recognition of, I guess, what I'm capable of and what I can, basically what I can do. I think it gives you a really good boost within the business. It's given me great visibility, and it's definitely something that I would recommend. I think the visibility, not just within your organisation and within the leadership group within your organisation, but also more broadly within our sector. And I think having the opportunity now to network with, I guess, my cohort since winning the award, being able to network overseas has been incredible, and being able to be work with Sam on the Future Leader Forum as well. More networking opportunities, more opportunities to share my thoughts, to influence. It's just been incredible, a great opportunity and great experience.
Jon?
Yeah, look, I'd echo what Jessica said. For me, there are probably a couple of points. The first thing that the scholarship allowed me to do was to share my opinion on the industry with my leaders at Coke, but also with others. I had some strong views about how we manage a casual workforce and looking to make more roles permanent and provide people with strong career paths. And that gave me a voice to share that with the leaders of our industry. And I hope that I was able to make some small difference there. So that was the first thing that was really exciting about the scholarship. Secondly, Jess and I, in hindsight, were very fortunate that we got the opportunity to go overseas and join the Consumer Goods Forum Future Leaders program. I went to one in Stockholm, and then Jess and I both made it to Boston. And they were fantastic trips, and I only hope that future winners of the scholarship get that same opportunity. But I guess we'll have to wait and see. Finally, to pick up on Jess's point around networking, there's of course, the fact that senior leaders in the industry get to know who you are and get to know your name. But I think for me, even more importantly, was just the fact that this scholarship has given me the opportunity to just meet so many wonderful people in the industry. And it's really given me a lot of faith and confidence that we've got a lot of talent, a lot of very passionate and friendly and willing and helpful people in the industry who, despite all of our competitive natures and all of our commercial outcomes we're all trying to drive, ultimately there are a lot of really good people in this industry, and using that award as a bit of a foundation to meet those folks has been fantastic. I've really enjoyed it, including the likes of yourself, Keith, Sam, and of course Jess, amongst many others.
Sam, you've had quite a bit of experience now with the Joe Berry Award, and of course picking up the scholarship side of it. I think you'd probably be very happy to hear what these two young people have just been saying, that the award has an enormous value. What do you see as the future for the scholarship?
Before I answer that part of the question, I think my reflection on our involvement in the Joe Berry Award and the Future Leader Award or Scholarship is absolutely, it's the highlight of my year. participating in not only reading the essays, but then the judging really blows me away in terms of the calibre of people coming through our sector. You know, their depth of knowledge, their understanding of the issues, their thought about those issues and the opportunities that they present, I think, are always, you know, top class. The judging this year also took place virtually. But I think it still demonstrated that level of level of calibre that we have within the sector. I know one of my fellow judges was reflecting afterwards about, and this person is a leader in their field, was just reflecting that hearing the delegates talk about their chosen subject really gives you a different way as a leader of thinking about that topic. So it kind of broad for us. I think we get as much out of it as hopefully those that participate in. So I think it's a mutual experience. In my mind, it's a mutual experience, but you know, the bottom line is I'm always blown away by the calibre. I always think the industry's in really good hands if this is the leadership coming through, and it really does, I think, bode well for the future. In terms of the future of the award, I just see it going from strength to strength and really trying to drive it more broadly through the industry. But I think the big for me, there's two key here, is this networking piece and trying to build up a bit of a community around Joe Barrier and the Future Leader Scholarship, I think, is an important aspect to it. And I know, Keith, you've been doing a lot of work to enable that to happen. So I think that community is really important, and it gives people a network that they can call on when they are facing an issue in their own business, or they just want to test something out with someone, or even moving on to looking at potentially mentoring some people coming through. Because I know that's also very important, is having someone in your career that you can bounce some of those questions across, that's in maybe a more senior role, but can at least give you a bit of a steer. So I think networking and mentoring are two areas I know, Keith, you've been working on that would be great to continue on developing.
John?
Look, I just thought I'd pick up on Sam's comment there around networking and sharing and learning from peers. In fact, this afternoon, I'll be on the line to Mike Colern, an ex-Arnott's Trading Partner Forum Scholarship winner, who's moved back to New Zealand. And he and I are catching up for an hour this afternoon to talk about some shared experiences across the industry and share some ideas. So quite coincidental that it's happening today, but there you go. It's proof in the pudding.
The whole concept of the Joe Barrier Award has been, for all of its life, the idea of giving both education and exposure to people who enter. And I'm just totally excited listening to you talk about the fact that that's what it's done for you. It's given you exposure, as John said, to senior management, and Jessica is the same, but it's also given you exposure to a network of assistants. And we know that the alumni that we've set up for the Joe Barrier Award, now with 34 current members, is something that perhaps is about to occur also with the Scholarship Award, because the numbers are growing, and it's time for you to, or a good time for you, to be set up as an alumni as such. The upcoming podcast in the series will be an explanation on how to get yourself into the Joe Barrier Award and what value employees see in those who enter. Ezra Oziga and James Hepworth from Woolworths will define the key points. Are you making any measurable moves to put yourself to the forefront? Joe Barrier 2021 opens on November 1st, but you can pre-register from the beginning of October through our website, joebarrierward.com.au. Jessica, Samantha and John, this has been a delightful discussion and a really, really interesting one on looking at what will happen with the leaders of the future. We've been delighted to have you here. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you,
Thanks
Keith.
for having us.
Thanks, Keith. Thanks for the opportunity.